Let me take you guys back to the early days of Genshin theorizing, in the times where we barely know anything about the lore of the game, and in the times where we barely know anything about the Tsaritsa. There exists a pretty free-form theory that the Tsaritsa's motivation for collecting the Gnoses all hinges on the notion that she was doing it all for love, and for a past lover. So it was debated whether or not it was to seek revenge, revive, avenge, or just to find closure for said lover. The theory essentially revolves around the Tsaritsa's loss of a lover. Some more ambitious forms of the theory were claiming that the Tsaritsa loved the Cryo Archon who perished in the Cataclysm. And while I can no longer find the post, but there was other form of the theory that alleges that the Tsaritsa had instead loved the previous Cryo Archon. Though we now know that neither of those two claims are true, one of Nod Krai's new book series titled Hymns of the Far North, which entails a collection of short stories that revolves around several very prominent names in Teyvat's lore, such as the Heavenly Principles, some of the Shades, and even Nibelung, tells us a tale that may have given us a clue which shows that the initial theory of the Tsaritsa's motivation revolving around love actually has far more merit to think about rather than just some theory that utilized the phrase that she has run out of love. Before I carry on, I'm just gonna give you guys a heads up on potential spoiler warnings for Nod Krai's Archon quest, and of course the majority of Teyvat's overarching lore surrounding the Heavenly Principles, Shades, and other older gods of Teyvat, just in case you wanna read those up yourselves first. Right, to understand this refreshed theory now, there are three sources that we are gonna have to touch upon from Genshin's library. First is the Hymns of the Far North Volume 2, then we have the Ballad of the Fjords Battle Pass Spear, and we have a small section of Renee's notes from the Narcissisent Cruise Ordo, but the first two is mostly where the meat of this theory comes from. Hymns of the Far North Volume 2 tells us of a couple of stories from old Snezhnayan legends, with one of them being that of a man named Saaralainen, a man who was presumably from outside of Teyvat and traveled in a starry steed in which he rode with to Hisi Island, and then courted the beautiful daughter of an ancient Frostmoon Scion forebearer named Pakai Suko. However, as a condition for marriage, Pakai Suko told Saaralainen to open the gates of Pohjola, a land shrouded in darkness and mist. While he understood that the elder had a wicked scheme surrounding opening said gate, Saaralainen understood that he basically had no choice but to do it. Because if he didn't, then Pakai Suko would have just told his daughter to do so as a form of punishment for some reason. So Saaralainen went to go and open the gates of Pohjola, only to then be killed by the Lord of the Seven Calamities, in which he was then carved into 7 pieces. Pakai Suko's daughter, presumably out of heartbreak, never sought to marry anyone after. Now, before I get into analyzing that story, let's talk about the Ballad of the Fjord description, which tells the story of Hyperborea and Ajax. No, not that one, but the one he was named after, who was a hero of old Snezhnayan folklore. Young Ajax discovered the country of gold and white stone beneath the depths of the frozen sea, which can be attributed to him discovering Hyperborea itself. There were many great stories about him, such as the ones where he sailed a ship into the belly of a whale, or where he fought a dragon for 7 days in the plains of Hyperborea. But the one that correlates Ajax with Saaralainen is the story of him falling in love with someone named Snegurotchka, but lost each other due to the wicked tricks of the changelings. The parallels of the stories are pretty straightforward. Saaralainen was, well, quote-unquote tricked by Pakai Suko, and the love story between him and the unnamed Hisi Island beauty ended in horrid tragedy, while Ajax and Snegurotchka were also separated by the tricks of a changeling. Though it was never specifically mentioned that Ajax had also suffered the same fate of death such as Saaralainen, there are other similarities which point to the notion that these two are the same beings. The name Pakai Suko is thought to be derived from the Finnish word of Pakkasuko, which meant Father Frost, who in Slavic tradition is also the name of Snegurotchka's grandfather. Ajax was said to have only taken what gold he needed from the dragon he defeated to cure his friend's sickness, while Saaralainen's story in Hymns of the Far North is coincided by a Frostmoon Scion prayer that calls for healing and disease curing. And all of that builds up to the general theory that the daughter of Pakai Suko, who might as well be Snegurotchka, is the representation of the Tsaritsa, while Saaralainen or Ajax is the lover who was taken away from the Tsaritsa. And with Saaralainen's fate of being split into 7 fragments, it completes the theory of Saaralainen being the third descender who was then tricked into opening the gates of Celestia, whose 7 fragmented remains were then used to create the Gnoses by the Lord of the 7 Calamities, or in this theory's case, would be the Heavenly Principles. All in all, it's a pretty cool, very dark, yet very plausible theory that could be used to become the basis of why the Tsaritsa is looking to gather the Gnoses in the first place. A lot of it is also supported by more Finnish legends. Saaralainen is likely a reference to the name Ahti Saaralainen, which was one of the war heroes that was blended into the story of Lemminkainen in the Finnish epic poetry collection titled the Kalevala. In one of the myths, Lemminkainen was a figure that was split into pieces after drowning in the river of Tuonela, basically their version of the underworld, after trying to kill a black swan that lives there in an effort to win the daughter of Louhi as his wife. Louhi herself was the ruler of Pohjola in the Tales of Kalevala. After finding out about his fate, Lemminkainen's mother sought a rake from Ilmarinen to gather his broken body from the river, and after gathering every single piece of his body, sewing them back and obtaining a drop of magic honey, she was able to bring him back to life. Now, if we put that into the context of the Tsaritsa, well, it just makes it all the more plausible. The 7 Gnoses were made out of the remains of the 3rd descender, who would be Saaralainen in this theory, and it is possible that the Tsaritsa has noticed that the Gnoses indeed harbor parts of her lover's remains, and therefore, maybe has a plan that involves gathering up all the remains the way Lemminkainen's mother had done for her son, piecing him back together, and then potentially bringing him back to life. Personally, I love this theory. It ties a lot of what we are already teased with when it comes to the Tsaritsa's existence, and it also dives deeper into the lore of the Heavenly Principles and Celestia with how they governed Teyvat in the more ancient times before the Archons became a thing. There's just a couple of things that I both want to talk about relating to other parts of the theory, and some more extensions to the theory that I thought of the more I looked into its building blocks. So one part that I'm still thinking twice about is the existence of Pohjola. In the theories that others have proposed, Pohjola is the representation of Celestia, and when Saaralainen was told to open the gates of Pohjola, it meant that he was opening the gates of Celestia. But I want to think that it's not really exactly that. Sure, Pohjola can be Celestia, but a part of me is also thinking that Pohjola is rather a place that was supposed to represent the abyss. Within Finnish mythology, Pohjola is also thought of to be of similar nature to Tuonela, which as we know is the land of the dead. And from another book that analyzed the Kalevala mythologies, Pohjola can actually just be an abstract place that stands as the source of evil or a foreboding, horrible, forever cold land in the far north. Even using places such as Tartarus and Thule, both already places of abject darkness, to instead describe Pohjola. When we take it back into the context of Teyvat, the source of evil from the purview of the traveler had always been the abyss. And to begin with, Saaralainen was only turned into 7 fragments once he was within the land of Pohjola, which in of itself was already described to be a place that was shrouded in darkness and mist. Not exactly the type of description that we usually correlate with Celestia. It could mean that it was only while he was within Pohjola itself did he either encounter or interact with something that caught the eye of the Heavenly Principles, and because his sin was deemed to have been so great that they decided to enact said punishment on him. This would be in line with how the Heavenly Principles would punish beings in their dominion for committing blasphemy, such as what they did with Orobashi, who read forbidden knowledge regarding Teyvat's true past that had been barred by the Heavenly Principles from the present inhabitants of Teyvat. Consequently, we can also look at the concept of Pohjola from the eyes of beings from within the times of ancient Teyvat and consider Celestia as its representation. Not everyone was happy with the existence of those usurpers, and calling the land in which your enemies come from as dark, foggy, and shrouded in mist is something that you would definitely do. And it basically means that Saaralainen was someone who trespassed into the Heavenly Principles' territory, and yeah, I can't imagine that going all too well for him. But another reason why I also liked Pohjola being Celestia is that it opens up the notion of connecting even more pieces of lore that doesn't surround Nod Krai, Snezhnaya, and Hyperborea, but helps expand the history of those areas through their places in the lore. A lot of this side of my theory focuses on the notion that Saaralainen rode upon a starry steed to traverse the world. You know what else is a star in this world? The sun. You know what the sun is also synonymous with? Solar. You know what steeds usually pull? A chariot. And what is Solar and Chariot related in Tevat that once, I don't know, fell and made a huge crater in Liyue around the same time that three moon sisters met their demise? Yep, the Solar Chariot. My guess is that the steed that Saaralainen rode upon is what the Solar Chariot is supposed to be. The daughter to a servant of Hyperborea was being courted by a man who was able to attempt opening the gates of Celestia. What if, all those years ago, the Tsaritsa was the new embodiment of one of the other moon spirits, and just like the story of the first angel and the Voyager, due to the fact that she fell in love with Saaralainen, who had been violating Celestia's rule, also suffered the same consequences as the first angel, which was to be separated from her lover for all eternity and have their memories completely wiped. And after he was punished by the heavenly principles, the Silver Chariot of the Moon Sisters was also overturned due to the aftermath of the Great War of Vengeance, which included the war against the Second Who Came and the Voyager. And then the Solar Chariot, being Saaralainen's loyal steed, was knocked down from the skies and crashed in the chasm. Geographically, it could also make more sense. Venti's statue in Mondstadt being the gate to Celestia, at least, presumably with the writing on it, with the distance that it has with the chasm, makes it rather plausible for a chariot to have fallen at an angle from Celestia's gates and make that crater. The Solar Chariot was also known as the Star of Daybreak, and it was evident that it possessed some form of sentience. The chariot was known to have fallen into a deep slumber after it crashed in Liyue, and it remained that way for a long time before it suddenly reawakened at the site of the Archon War. Let me run something by you guys that may show you how depressing this might be. If the Solar Chariot was indeed Saaralainen's loyal steed, and if indeed Saaralainen was turned into the Gnoses, wouldn't it make sense for the chariot to wake up when the Archon War ravaged around him? What if he felt the presence of his old master within those Gnoses? What if it woke up thinking that its master had finally returned after all those years? What if it then realized that its master was no more, and the utter sadness it felt when it recognizes that his master had been made into a tool that countless gods around him are killing each other for was just too much to bear? And that is why it decided to fly back into the sky away from the reminder of what his master had become. The Tsaritsa being closely related to the moon is also something that I think isn't all too far-fetched. The first Cryo Archon, Belisar, was also known as the Fae King. And if there were to be a powerful force for a race such as the Fae, there would be other figures that would serve a similar role for other races, such as ones that follow the moons. The Tsaritsa could have been someone who holds that power when it comes to the followers of the other moons. And that would also explain the one thing that I never really quite understood about her. Of course, mostly because we know nothing about her, but there's also the question of why is it that the people of Snezhnaya have been so willing to follow everything that their Tsaritsa has ordered them to do? Because we've seen people straight up rebel against the Archons if there was enough reason to incite such insurrections. Mondstadt's old aristocracy abused the freedom their Archon gave them and ruled with corruption. The US Chisings challenged the notion of their Archon actually being needed or not. Inazuma had a full-blown civil war over their Archon's actions. Academia sages literally forced their Archon into captivity to make their own god. Fontaine was ready to turn on their Archon for supposedly being incompetent, while Natlan is the only showcase where the people merely questioned the Archon, but can't really afford to do anything else because they had to fight for survival themselves. What is it about the Tsaritsa that makes it so that people fear her to such an extent, to the point where even if she decided to wage war against her own gods, the people of Snezhnaya would still hope to be under her grace? Not to be under the grace of the gods who rule their god, but to be under the grace of their current god. Her followers only hope to be on her side when the day of her rebellion against the divine comes at last. And they say when, not if, so they know this is coming. It's as if nothing in the world is more terrifying to the Snezhnayans compared to being in the Tsaritsa's bad side. It honestly could really only mean one thing for me. The Tsaritsa is ridiculously powerful, or at the very least have come from a long lineage that has been feared for their power and divine ability by a long line of Snezhnayans. And being either a descendant or the former embodiment of one of the long-lost Moon Sisters, one of Tevat's oldest primordial big boy power, is for me reason enough for them to be terrified. But maybe you would ask, considering the Nod Krai Archon quest, If the Tsaritsa was indeed the embodiment of one of the previous moons, then why did she need Columbina's powers? Well, maybe it's because she no longer has it. Maybe that was the punishment bestowed upon her. Her power stripped, and with the moon she represented perishing, gone was her path to naturally acquiring it in the first place. And then, what if they had also wiped her memories of Saaralainen the same way they did to the first angel and the Voyager? What if she lived all those years not remembering the person she loved, only to come face to face with the cataclysm and then having to harbor the Gnoses due to Belshazzar's death before, just like the solar chariot, realizing what was truly within those Gnoses, which then brought back all the memories of her one true love? Her rage probably would have been insane. And what if, amongst all the chaos, she then realized that some of the other original 7 have already known about this fact, and one of them happened to be Barbados? That could explain why she cut him off 500 years ago. That could explain why amongst all the Gnosis retrievals that she had directly ordered, it was only Ventis that was actually forceful and violent in nature. Not only did she probably resonated with Signora's pain from her time as Rosaline, the Tsaritsa also wanted to let her anger be known to Venti. It would all be connected back to the tale of Saaralainen. Maybe she came across a piece of ancient information where gathering the Gnosis would allow her to attain a certain power that allows her to achieve unprecedented cosmic feats. What if it had been a miraculous ladybug situation where having them all together allows for that person to utter any wish and have it come true? Or maybe the Tsaritsa just wanted to see her love become whole again. Whether or not she has a chance to bring him back, she may not care. She just wants to feel every piece of him back together for one last time. Or maybe, just maybe, the Tsaritsa wants revenge. But revenge in the cruelest yet most direct way possible. Piero had asked in the Shades trailer, what is the price of killing a god? What if the Tsaritsa wants to use the Gnosis to kill a god? No, not the heavenly principles itself, but another god that may have close ties with the heavenly principles. What if she wants to kill the second who came? And this is all because there was something that I never quite understood when it comes to Nouvelette's character story that tells about the heavenly principles and the Gnosis. It was mentioned in that story that the usurper and the one who came after created the Gnosis together. Beforehand, I used to just pass this off as a whole, oh, the third descender was someone who was willing to collaborate with the heavenly principles and sacrifice themselves in order to stabilize authority in Tevat, and that we can just assume that the sentence, the one who came after, was trying to refer to the third descender. But with the new story of Saaralainen, we can now know for sure that they have not worked together, which meant that the only other being who can fill that title of the one who came after would only be the second who came. And of course, it would make perfect sense from the beginning. In the original Chinese writing, the second who came was rather known as the second one who came after. And in a timeline sense, I would say that all of it could definitely fit. The Great War of Vengeance, which in its aftermath saw the fall of the Three Moons and the Solar Chariot, presumably happened far before the creation of the Gnosis and the Archon War, since a young Morax, who is now over 6,000 years old, saw it happen, and the Archon War itself wouldn't start until another 2,000 years. While it was mentioned that Saaralainen was split into 7 fragments, I would warrant caution in immediately assuming that he was turned straight into the entirety of the Gnosis itself. We know that the Gnosis have power function that utilize the elements of the 7 sovereigns, and while the authority of the divine seat itself isn't directly linked to the Gnosis, I'd say that it's pretty reasonable to think that some portion of that 7 sovereign power is what the heavenly principles imbued the Gnosis with, which would then make Saaralainen's remains more than likely be the outer design that houses those elemental powers, as it would also fit the whole carving narrative. That time between the War of Vengeance and the Archon War gives us a time gap in which major godly processes can happen, and changes outside of Tevat can finally take its shape in the bigger picture of the world. After the War of Vengeance, there was a long time where no such humongous conflict would happen, and in that period of time, when people would have thought that the second who came had been defeated and fled Tevat, what if they ended up staying and formed a partnership with the heavenly principles? And within those peaceful years, they realized that their and the heavenly principles' control over Tevat's authority had waned significantly, And with the fragments of Saaralainen, the two of them worked together to create divine seats and the Gnoses to then spread their authority to the chosen gods in Tevat, while making sure that the original order of the sovereigns remained suppressed. Because there has to be a workaround as to who is actually keeping an eye on most of the things that are happening, right? The heavenly principles have been in a slumber for probably centuries now, yet the Shades aren't exactly beings who hold the authority to maintain any sort of active supervision, and a lot of their use of authority is often frowned upon by the heavenly principles. There must be another cog, a bigger cog in this wheel, right? Maybe the second who came ended up becoming someone who was instrumental to maintaining the heavenly principles' authority over Tevat. Maybe after their huge war, both sides were instead able to arrive at the realization that the two of them just needed one another. Especially after all the damage that they did to one another. Why else would they then work together to ensure just the heavenly principles' rule over Tevat? As someone who came in out of nowhere and almost sunk Tevat in its entirety, that doesn't seem like the natural judgment that someone like the second who came would have made. And now with the knowledge that the heavenly principles is indeed still in a slumber, maybe the Tsaritsa found that the second who came have some connection to this rule that they have over Tevat, and discovered a way to try and sever that god from the heavenly principles by utilizing the very power that they have created to control Tevat in the first place and avenging her lover in the process. An eye for an eye, as simple as that, right? It certainly would fit the increasingly sacrificial narrative that Genshin has always been building up throughout the entirety of its story. Almost nothing major in Genshin's history wasn't achieved without having some huge sacrifice becoming a part of it. Venti had long sacrificed being a god for the sake of his people's true freedom. Zhongli had to sacrifice his godhood so that his nation could stand on its own. A, Nahida, and Farina needed the sacrifice of their predecessors to maintain the stability of their nation, and Mavuika needed the sacrifice of the life that she knew and Capitano in order to win their fight against the Abyss. Who knows, maybe in return for using the power of the seven Gnoses all at once, the Tsaritsa would have to sacrifice herself. And in a more comforting sense, perhaps that's what she is really looking for. A way out of immortality and a way to once again be with her one true love. Or it could just be some, like Tony Stark shit. We don't know, man. All of this is just speculation. But it does make me look forward to a lot more of what Nod Krai will reveal about Tevat, or their history, I guess, and more about what it would prepare for us to see when we go into Snezhnaya and come face to face with the Tsaritsa herself. That's about it for this video. Thanks for listening to my stupid lore yaps once more. Hope you guys took something away from it or at least had fun watching. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.